Zach Laws of Gold Derby here with Colleen Atwood. She's a legendary costume designer, and we're here to talk about her new film, Bombshell. Colleen, you've dressed a lot of really interesting people throughout your career. Talk a little bit about dressing the women of Fox News. I mean, was that a particular challenge for you?
Well, it was definitely a challenge to dress those three ladies and to create the characters they were portraying as the three women of Fox News was something I'd never really done before. I used real footage as my reference, and then created looks that sort of plugged into that to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, I mean, there's a lot of footage on these ladies that you have to work with. From a perspective of narrative, right? Can you talk a bit about how that influenced some of your designs?
You mean narrative, meaning the story? Or?
Right. Yes. I mean, yeah, and the greater theme of it being about, sexual harassment in the workforce.
Well, I think the greater theme of it is also about, the idea of how women are perceived by the public, and in this case, Roger Ailes was a master at sort of giving people enough to keep them interested, but not too much, which I think is the key to that style of dressing and that sort of world of dressing. The sexual harassment part of it didn't really come into play as far as figuring out the costumes, as much as sort of trying to suggest through the costumes the kind of things that would key people off, which was more kind of representative of, I think, of what Fox News was.
Right. I mean, I think more so to the point, it's about like the sort of what's the word I'm looking for here? The subjugation of women. I mean, the way that the network presents these women as being playthings, toys, things to be glared at by men watching from their homes.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was more complex than that, I think, because it was also, that he gave them power and manipulated them into thinking they were more than that. Mm. So it was a double-edged sword in a way.
Right, exactly. In terms of color, I mean, the movie has a very vibrant palette. Talk a little bit about what you were thinking about in terms of how you wanted to, portray the core women through color.
Well, with each character, I sort of chose a path. With Charlize's characters, Megyn Kelly, it was more minimal color, more kind of removed from really bright colors, and that, like, to kind of show she was receding from that place and sort of was owning her own thing a little bit more. With Gretchen Carlson's character, played by Nicole, her costumes were very much, kind of the colors of Fox News. They were vibrant. They were, what you'd call happy colors. Also traditional colors that they like in television, because they're, they photograph well in the environment they're being shot in. And then Margot Robbie's character was, she was really not on camera that much, so she was more like a worker at the network that had incredible ambition, and then when she had the moment to be in front of the camera, transformed into, as she was described as a Barbie doll. She just totally, weighed in, was manicured by Fox News.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had to dress a lot more women too.
Yes.
All these real life personalities and all these people backstage as well. Talk a little bit about what you had to do in terms of that.
Well, the other women who were playing broadcasters, I sort of used the same formula, but just gave each of them, like Jean Pirro, a different palette. She was more my black and white girl. The people who were like Brooke and some of the other players that were the sort of attorneys and people in the movie who were playing real people also, but they were more weren't all about color. They were more about portraying texture and sort of the ideal what people wore in a very professional sort of legalese sort of background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think people can take for granted how difficult it is to do contemporary costumes. And I mean, you've done your fair share of really extravagant designs, working with people like Tim Burton or Rob Marshall. Is it almost a different kind of thinking you have to do when you're dressing like real life people and you're having to do it in a contemporary setting?
It's definitely a different mindset. You're kind of using a different sort of research. I made up things, but not at the level I usually make up stuff. I was kind of always circling back, to the monitors, to what I knew, the press pictures of the girls and that, to try to keep it really kind of pared down and realistic.
Yeah, and you guys are doing this. I mean, this was a really accelerated shooting schedule, from what I understand. Yeah. I mean, there was a race to the finish. How did that affect your work?
Well, we were really busy in my department. You don't really notice in the movie because it's so seamless, but, Barry Ackroyd's amazing camera work, you see every direction at once. You never knew who was going to be on camera when. And then we also moved through the script very quickly. So sometimes I was changing both principals and the background for different story days 3 or 4 times a day. So my crew, which was pretty small, and I were really kind of on our toes the whole time, just kind of waiting for the next change, setting it up, getting ready, figuring it out as we went. So same for the set department. They had to redress the set to look like different days, and it's very subtle, but it's all there. I mean, everybody really worked hard to make it work.
Yeah. You've worked with many great directors in your career. Talk a little bit about Jay Roach. I mean, what does he give you? I think this was the first time that you've worked with him. Is that right?
Yeah, I had never, I'm a fan of Jay's work, but I hadn't really met him until this job. And, the level of sort of thoroughness with his research, with the story, and his integrity with telling a political story is, surpassed by no one. He really cares about the process. He's very aware of what everyone does on the movie, including the crowd, everybody. He's very keyed into that and very grateful to everyone and so lovely to work with.
Well, like I said, I mean, you've worked with many great people, and you've worked with them multiple times. You've worked with Tim Burton multiple times. You worked with Rob Marshall multiple times. You worked with Jonathan Demme multiple times in some of his very best movies. Yeah. What do you look for in a relationship with a filmmaker to help sort of guide your work?
I think it's I've worked with Michael Mann a lot too, which is a great filmmaker as well. I think the thing is, the journey that you make with them is you sort of try to get inside their head and try to serve the story they're trying to tell first and foremost. Behind the script, that's the single most important thing to me. And with those directors, they're very tight on what the script is, what the story they're telling, and the style in which they're telling it. So I think that that's a relationship building thing. And in some cases, it becomes a shorthand. In some ways, you can save them a lot of conversations because there's some things who they are, so it simplifies it a little bit and makes them probably circle back, because for them it's a easier game than having all new people around them all the time. But it just varies with the story, I think.
I guess it must help when it comes to choosing projects as well. You say, well, I already trust this person, so I can commit to this. Right?
Yeah, it's like, for me, I mean, always, I even if something isn't on the page, but I know the guy that's directing it, and I have a huge amount of trust of them taking that and making it into something special. It's kind of fun to see what they do with it, because it's not always right in front of you on the page.
Mm-hmm. Has it become easier? I mean, you've done a lot of really great movies in the span of about 30 years or more than 30 years. Has it become easier to figure out the color schemes, the design ideas, the character ideas as time passes, or do you always learn new things with every new movie?
I mean, the thing I love about what I do is it's a constant learning curve. I think it's exciting to walk into something not knowing what you're going to do, not going back to the same, feeding trough, and sort of trying to always reinvent, your take on something and bring something new. And also, luckily, to surround yourself with people that also bring new ideas and new things into your world. It's, it makes design in costume a really great field.
You've won 4 Oscars in your career. Talk a little bit about what that recognition meant to you.
Well, it's such a journey to, I mean, the nominations are really the first step and the sort of the most kind of amazing part of the journey to me, because it's all the other people that do what you do that nominate you. And now, to win an Oscar's kind of, you just don't know, to me, it's still a crapshoot. You never know if you're going to win or not. And once you have an Oscar, you kind of forget about it, like, quickly when you go to work the next day, perhaps, and go back into your saying. It doesn't change anything. In other words, it just makes you an Oscar winner, which is part of an elite group, which is very nice. But it doesn't make your work any different or how you approach it. And it's an interesting phenomenon, because sometimes the Oscar in other countries is kind of more lauded sometimes than in the U.S. Like, people get used to them here, but sometimes I'll go someplace foreign and they'll be really like, excited that I've won an Oscar. To them, it's even a bigger deal than it is to us in America, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you working on right now? I mean, you're always busy.
I'm prepping Little Mermaid with Rob. So
okay.
I'm working on that and segueing into the next sequel of Fantastic Beasts.
Okay, very nice. Before I yeah, you're always busy. I think this is like the 4th movie you've done this year, so you've always got something.
Not really,
no?
but
More than yeah. Well, I guess they're all released this year. So, Before I let you go, this movie just opened up in theaters, and the discourse around it has been very interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people never thought that they would be identifying with women who were hosts on Fox News. And yet, here we are. We're having these really interesting conversations around this movie. What do you hope people take away from this film when they finally get a chance to see it?
Well, I think that the idea of unifying people is really important now. And if you can unify people as women or as human beings, no matter what their circumstance or what their job is, it's a step forward for humanity, because I think right now there's so much dialogues about separating people. It's about differences. And I think now with this movie, the message is not so much about differences, but it's about things that humanity has in common. And I think it's a great message.
Right. Absolutely. Colleen, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the film. I look forward to seeing what's coming up next.
All right. Thank you.